Good evening. Welcome back. So this is class number 4 of what happened at Sinai. So last week we had, I guess, what I would call a very rational type of class, a rational approach to prove or give strong evidence for the veracity of the events at Sinai, of our tradition of what occurred to our ancestors. This week is going to be a very different style class, where instead of the rational, we're going to be dealing more with the mystical. And that's really the beauty of Torah and Torah study, is there's something in it for everyone. Whatever, people have different interests and find meaning in different types of different areas of Torah study. And some people like to touch a little bit here, a little bit there, touch everything. So we're going to be going with the mystical approach of what happened at Sinai tonight. Now, you may be familiar. There's a somewhat famous teaching of our sages in the Midrash, in the Talmud, that before God offered the Torah to the Jewish people, he first offered it to the other nations of the world. And the way the Midrash presents it, we'll bring it up on the slides, is as follows. The Midrash says, there we go. It says, and it's in a number of places, this is just one source, when the Lord appeared to give the Torah to Israel, it is not to Israel alone that he appeared, but to all the nations. First, he went to the children of Esau, his descendants, and he asked them, will you accept the Torah? They asked, what is written in it? He answered, you shall not kill. They answered, the entire essence of our father is murder, as it is written, and the hands are the hands of Esau. And it is with this that his father assured him, and by your sword shall you live. So it's referring to when Isaac gives a blessing to Esau, he tells him, by the sword you shall live. So they said, our very essence is murder, and the Torah that states, do not murder. So we don't want to accept such a thing. He then went to the children of Ammon and Moab, 2 other nations, and asked them, will you accept the Torah? They asked, what is written in it? And God answered, you shall not commit adultery. They responded, Lord of the universe, Erva, illicit relations, is our entire essence. As it is written, and the 2 daughters of Lot conceived by their father, the nations of Ammon and Moab are descendants of Lot, conceived through his daughters, through an illicit relationship. And therefore they said, that's our very essence. We cannot accept a Torah that forbids that. He then went and found the children of Yishmael and asked them, will you accept the Torah? They asked, what is written in it? And he answered, you shall not steal. They responded, Lord of the universe, our father's entire essence is stealing. It says, and he, meaning Yishmael, shall be a wild man, his hand against all. Yado bakol, he steals. And there was none among, and so they said, no, thank you, we don't want the Torah. And it says, there was none among all the nations to whom he did not go to speak and knock at their door, asking if they would accept the Torah. And finally, as we know, he came to the Jews. The Jews asked, how much does it cost? God said, it's free. They said, okay, we'll take 2, right? Okay, that's not exactly how it goes. Rather, what happened was he went to the Torah, he went to the Jews, and the Jewish people did not ask what's written in it. They didn't ask how much it costs. They just said, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do it, we will listen. And they famously, we said, we will do before we said we will listen. Even before we knew what was in it, we agreed that we would accept the Torah. Now, just on a simple level, what exactly this Midrash means, is this to be taken literally? Did God go to all the nations and ask them, do you want the Torah? I'm not sure. I think there are different ways to understand it. I think some take it literally and say that there was, God gave every nation a prophet and in some way offered them the option of having the Torah. It could be it's just implicit that in their relationship with God that had developed over time, that it was clear that they wouldn't accept the Torah, whether they were actually approached or not. It's not completely clear to me, how literally we're supposed to take this. But be that as it may, if the sages report it to us, it's there to teach us something fundamental. And that's what I want to talk about. And I think we could really ask a couple of very pointed questions, just at face value, if we accept it at face value, but there's still some things that don't quite make so much sense about this midrash, about this teaching. Number one, we know that the Gentiles also have mitzvos, commandments. They're commanded in 7 mitzvos. They're called the 7 Noahide laws, the 7 Sheva mitzvos b'nei Noach, the 7 mitzvos that were really given to Noah. And since everybody is a descendant of Noah, so everybody is obligated in those mitzvos, those commandments. And the Talmud lists what those commandments are. And they are as follows. The descendants of Noah, i.e. all of humanity, were commanded to observe 7 mitzvos. The mitzvah of establishing courts of judgment, and the prohibition against blessing, which really means cursing the name of God, the prohibition of idol worship. We say blessing because we don't want to say the word cursing. So in Hebrew, in the Talmud, it says blessing, but really it means cursing, a prohibition against cursing God, prohibition of idol worship, prohibition against forbidden sexual relations, prohibition of bloodshed, of murder, prohibition of robbery, and the prohibition against eating a limb from a living animal. So those are the seven Noahide laws, which according to our tradition, the Gentiles are not required to keep the whole Torah, 613, but they are required to keep these 7. So if that's the case, then there's a real problem with the story that we just read, because it goes that God goes to the children of Esav and he says, do you want my Torah? And they say, what? Sing it. So he says, don't murder. Oh, they say, okay, no, thank you. We don't want it. And he goes to Ammon and Moab and he says, do you want my Torah? And they say, what is it saying? It says, you should not have illicit relations, do not commit adultery. They say, okay, no, thank you. He goes to Yishmael and they say, what's in it? And he says, it says, don't steal. They say, no, thank you. Well, according to our tradition, all of those nations are anyways required to keep those commandments. All 3 of those are part of the 7 commandments given to all Gentiles. So whether they accept the Torah or not, in our view of things, which we understand to be God's view of things, they're all anyways obligated in those. So what does that even mean? What does it say? If anything, it should say, what are the extra things on top of what we're obligating? It says, okay, keep Shabbos. Oh yeah, okay, no, we don't want to, we want to work on Saturday. Sorry, we don't want the Torah. But that's not what it says. It specifically names mitzvos that seemingly they're already obligated in. So how does that make any sense? That's the first question. The second question is just on a very basic level, like, really? Seriously? God considered, he came to us last. First, he went to all the other nations, and then finally he was like, okay, nobody else will take it. I'll ask the Jewish people. The Jewish people are the descendants of Abraham, of Avraham. Avraham, paved the way towards monotheism, had a special relationship with God. Avraham had 2 children, had 2 sons, more later, but 2 main sons, right? He had Yitzchak, Isaac, and Yishmael. Isaac was righteous, Yishmael not as righteous. Yitzchak followed the path of Avraham. Then Yitzchak had 2 sons, Yaakov and Esav, Jacob and Esau. Which one followed his path? Yaakov. Yaakov followed his path. He followed the path of Yitzchak, which was the path of Avraham. And then Yaakov had 12 sons, which formed the 12 tribes of Israel. And that's the nation that would ultimately receive the Torah. But it's because, what makes us chosen? Because we have an illustrious heritage from, Avraham chose God. It's not just random that we were chosen to receive the Torah. We're the descendants of Abraham, and Abraham paved the way. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they paved the way for us. So how do we they had a special relationship with God. So does it really make any sense to say that that God first went to all the other nations? Nobody would take it. And so fine, I'll go to the descendants of Abraham. Seemingly he would come to us first. So what does it mean that God first went to the other nations? That's my second question. So the first question is, why, when they ask what's in it, why is God telling them the mitzvos that they're already obligating anyways, and not the additional mitzvos that are found in the Torah? And number two, how do we understand that God went to the other nations first and left us for last? Aren't we the ones who should be first? Because we're the descendants of Abraham. Now, as I mentioned, the response of the Jewish people when God says, will you accept the Torah, was Naaseh v'nishma. We'll do it. We'll do the mitzvos. We'll perform the commandments, and we will listen. Meaning, first we commit that we'll do them. Then we say, and we'll listen. We'll learn them and find out what they are. So we first committed to perform them, and then we said, okay, and now we'll find out what they are. Now imagine for a second that you get a call from the President of the United States on his first day in office. He gives you a call and he says, Ted, Stuart, Trude, whoever, right? I have a very, very important job for you. Very, very important. Can you do it? And you say, sure, I could do it. He says, okay, I want you to be in charge of the nation's pandemic response from now on. You're like, whoa, wait a second, right? I don't know if I'm quite qualified for that, right? Well, that would be irresponsible to agree to the job before you actually know what it is. Isn't that somewhat irresponsible? And so why is our response better than the nations? The other nations respond, what does it say? Well, that seems like a very logical response under the circumstances, right? Well, our response is, we're going to do it. How could we respond that way? That seems somewhat irresponsible. And especially because I bet if I take a poll of everyone that's on this class, including myself, and I ask us all, do you keep every commandment in the Torah? Then the answer for everybody here is going to be no. Maybe we try to, but nobody is quite successful at keeping everything in the Torah all the time. So we don't even come through all the time. Can we really say that we never speak a word of lashon hara, of slander, a not nice word? Do we keep all the mitzvos? Do we always fulfill every single detail and every single law? Not necessarily. So hopefully we try our best, but do we? Nobody does. So isn't that a little bit irresponsible for us to agree, and especially without even hearing what's in it? So what's so great about our response? So the truth is that this conversation that we're having now, a very similar conversation took place about 1,500 years ago between a certain heretic and Rava, one of the great rabbis of the Talmud. And the Talmud recounts as follows. It says, a heretic said to Rava, he said, you impulsive nation who accorded precedence to your mouths over your ears. You spoke before you listened. You should listen first. Then if you are capable of fulfilling the commands, accept them. And if not, do not accept them. So he said, basically this challenge, why is that seems irresponsible? It doesn't seem wise that you accepted to fulfill the commandments without first hearing what they are. So Rava said to him, he said, about us who proceed wholeheartedly, it is written, the wholeheartedness of the upright will guide them. Whereas about those people who walk in deceit, it is written at the end of the same verse, and the perverseness of the faithless will destroy them. a little unclear what it means with all these verses, but Rashi really opens it up for us. The great commentary Rashi, 1040 to 1105, 11th century commentary on all of Talmud, basically all of the Torah. Rashi explains, what did Rava mean by his response that we who proceed wholeheartedly? He meant as follows: we walked with him with pure hearts, meaning God, we walked with God with pure hearts, like those who act out of love. And here's the key line, I think: we relied on him that he would not burden us with something that we could not be able to withstand. In other words, it wasn't a random call. Hello, who is it? The president. Do you accept the mission? Right? No, there was an existing relationship that went on, that existed there. We already had established a relationship with God in Egypt, in the desert, or even before that with our forefathers, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. And now we finally, this is the climax of everything. We arrive at Mount Sinai, and it's there that God says, are you ready to accept my commandments, my Torah? So it's true, we don't yet know all the details. We don't know exactly what we're getting ourselves into, but we're wholehearted with God. I mean, we trust him. We trust him. I think the contrast here is we are people who are wholehearted and to be trusted, as opposed to someone, this heretic, I guess, who's perverse, who's himself faithless. So not to be trusted. Someone who is trustworthy, who has integrity, trusts others, knows that they can trust others. Someone who is not trustworthy doesn't trust anybody, because that's just how they think. So we who are wholehearted and walk with integrity, we trusted God that he will only give us something that we're capable of fulfilling, of withstanding, as opposed to others perhaps did not trust God and to the same extent. So that is the answer really to this challenge, to this question, is how could we say Naaseh v'nishma, we'll do it, commit to do it before we even know? The answer is very simple, because it depends who's asking, right? If someone random is asking, so indeed, maybe it's not a smart response. But if it's someone that you trust, then they're not going to ask you to do something that you can't do. And so we see, and this really puts it out there clearly, that we're saying that if God entrusts us with his commandments, we accepted them not knowing what they are, because we knew that God will only give us something that we could do, that we could fulfill. But we also see that we have the ability, each and every one of us, to actually fulfill those commandments. It's not easy. It's not easy. It takes work. It takes effort. It takes study. It takes Torah study. It takes growth. It takes time. It takes a lot. It doesn't come free. But each and every one of us has the capability. Otherwise, God wouldn't have given them to us. But we're perhaps very nice. We have the ability. But perhaps there's something deeper here that gives us the ability. And that's where we get a little bit mystical and we dig a little deeper. So we spent a class 2 weeks ago, I think it was, discussing different opinions as to what exactly the Jewish people heard at Sinai. We had the opinion of the Ibn Ezra that they heard all 10 commandments from God. We had the opinion of the Ramban that they heard all 10, but they only understood clearly from God the first 2. The rest, the other 8, they just heard like an unclear sound from God, unclear voice. They couldn't make out the words, but God was actually speaking out those 8. We had the most controversial opinion of Maimonides, that they didn't hear anything so clearly. They just heard God's voice. They heard a sound. They knew it was God speaking, but they didn't hear anything clearly. And now I just want to throw in one more opinion, which may be the same as Ramban, and that is the opinion of Rashi. And Rashi says as follows in his commentary to the Chumash, to the Torah. He writes, right before the 10 commandments, the verse says, God spoke all these words saying, this is in the first time the 10 commandments appear in Exodus. God spoke all these words saying, And Rashi comments all these words. This teaches us that the Holy One, blessed be he, said the Ten Commandments in one utterance. He said them all in, that was the whole thing, all in one utterance, something that is impossible for a human being to say in a similar way, and also impossible to, to hear, I guess. You can't hear all 10 commandments in one utterance. And then he later explained each statement of the 10 commandments individually, although maybe they only stuck around to hear 2, and then they said, enough, we don't want to hear anymore. But we have this idea in Rashi that God spoke out all 10 commandments in one utterance. And it's a really strange thing, because what's the point of that? What is the point of declaring all 10 commandments in one utterance, especially if we can't understand it? And let's ask now back on, the same type of question on the Ramban. The Ramban said a similar thing. They heard all 10 from God. They only understood the first 2. The rest they didn't understand. So if they didn't understand it, then what's the point? What was the point of God speaking out all 10 commandments to them if they weren't going to understand them all? So the Maharal of Prague shed some light. He's going to be our entry point into understanding this, I think. And the Maharal has a commentary on Rashi. It's what we call a super commentary. It's a commentary on a commentary. And the Maharal, by the way, Rabbi Yehuda Lowy, famous allegedly for creating a golem, although that seems to be something that was invented much later, that he was someone who did that. But a great prolific writer. And in his commentary, in his super commentary to Rashi, he explains, he says, even though they couldn't understand anything, still he, meaning God, said them in one utterance. He still said all 10 commandments in one utterance to show that the entire Torah is one idea and one utterance, for the entire Torah emerges from the 10 commandments. So we have 2 fundamental ideas going on in this, just these short lines. The Maharal of the Gur Aryeh, that's the name of his commentary. This is actually just a couple lines from a very, very long piece. But he tells us, first of all, this idea that the entire Torah emerges from the 10 commandments, meaning this is an idea that's attributed back to much earlier, to the time of the Gaonim, the 10th century. I think Rav Haigon is the first one to famously say it, I believe, back in the 10th century. It's something we'll talk about more in a later class. But the idea is that somehow the 10 commandments are headings, or are somehow encompass all 613 mitzvos. And again, we're going to have to explore what that means, why that is in detail in a later class. But right now, I just want to bring out that idea. The entire Torah emerges from the 10 commandments. And also, he's telling us something else. The entire Torah is one idea. In other words, it's all tied together. It all relates. It all is intertwined. Every part of Torah somehow interconnects with other parts. It's all one big manifestation of God's will, all intertwined. So we have 2 ideas here. We have, first of all, that the 10 commandments represent the whole Torah. And now they're hearing all the 10 commandments at once. So in a sense, they're hearing the whole Torah in one utterance. And that's teaching them that all of the Torah is intertwined. Now, that's great. But I think there's one more step now that still doesn't explain why it was so important for them to hear it. Okay, they learned the lesson that it's all related. That's an important lesson. It all ties together. But let's see, maybe it goes a little bit deeper even. And that, I think, we could first bring out from a comment of Ramban. The Ramban says, the verse says as follows. It says, basically after the Jewish people heard God speak, they were fearful. According to some commentaries, this was before, when they were getting ready. According to some, this was after. But either way, it was about hearing God speak. And it says that they said, fear not. Sorry, Moses said to the people, fear not, for God has come in order to exalt you. Although we're going to see the Ramban translates this word not as exalt. The word in Hebrew is nasos. he translates as habituate you. We'll see what he says. In order that his awe shall be upon your faces, that you shall not sin. I did not answer that question yet, so I'm gonna get there. Sorry, that was just a chat comment. Now, it is plausible, says Ramban, to say that the verse means, for God is come in order to habituate you in your faith of him. For since he showed you the revelation of the divine presence, his faith entered your heart to enable you to cleave to him, and your soul will not be separated from that faith forever. So he's interpreting these words. God has come in order not to exalt you. He interprets it to mean to habituate you, to get you used to experience him. And since he showed you the revelation of the divine presence, his faith entered your heart to enable you to cleave to him, and your soul will not be separated from that faith forever. And what I understand from these words, perhaps, Ramban is telling us that the very experience of divine revelation was an experience that went right to the heart. Something that would never leave the hearts and souls of the Jewish people. Having experienced that prophecy, that divine revelation, so Ramban says it's going to enable you to cleave to him. It's going to habituate you in your faith of him. You're going to be able to cleave to him, and your soul will not be separated from that faith forever. In other words, something was implanted in our souls at that moment. And perhaps that's why we had to hear the whole Torah, so to speak, from God. Because at that moment, the entire Torah we experience on some level, and it goes into our hearts, and it's with us forevermore, because we experienced it through prophecy. We experienced it directly from God. That's perhaps why it was meaningful. It had some kind of effect to hear all 10 in one shot, even though we didn't actually understand it. But it wasn't about understanding it. It was about having God speak it to us and having it then enter our hearts. And this idea is perhaps the key to answer some of the questions that we opened with. We opened with the midrash about the teaching of the sages about the other nations. And we asked two questions. We asked, why would God, if they're asking what's in the Torah, why would God tell them the same commandments that they're already obligated in? They're anyways obligated in them. What does it mean that they're going to accept the Torah and then become obligated in them? And secondly, we asked that, did God really leave us for last, like the Jewish people? And it was, if nobody else takes it, then I'll go with the Jewish people. That doesn't seem to fit into the whole storyline. The Israelites are the descendants of Abraham, this one who had a special relationship with God, Isaac, Jacob. So how do we understand those two ideas? So Rabbi Shimon Schwab explains as follows. He says, and it's exactly on the point that we're learning now. We call the giving of the Torah Matan Torah. Matan means the gift of the Torah. Now, the Torah wasn't all given at that moment. There was a revelation at Sinai, and then we spent about a year at Sinai learning the Torah. And according to some, all the mitzvahs were taught then. According to some of those mitzvahs, some of those commandments were taught later, even in the desert. So, but certainly not everything happened on that first day of the revelation when God appears to us. Yet we call it the day of the giving of the Torah. Why is it called the day of the giving of the Torah? And the answer that Rabbi Schwab says is exactly what we've been talking about. It's the day that God put it into our hearts, that ability to fulfill the Torah, that ability for the Torah to become part of our essence. It's a part of us. It was instilled in us. And perhaps I'm suggesting it was that moment where we experienced prophecy of the 10 commandments, even though we didn't really understand it, but that drilled deep into our hearts, that it becomes a part of us. In the Talmud, it teaches us There was a certain rabbi, Rabbi Alexandri, and it says that when he prayed, he would say the following after he prayed. At the end of his prayers, he would say, Master of the universe, it is revealed and known before you that our will is to perform your will. Ritzoneno la'asot ritzonecha. Our will is to perform your will. God, we really want to do what's right. We really want to do the right thing. What prevents us? The yeast in the dough. What does that mean? He means the evil inclination within every person and the subjugation to the kingdoms, the society, we're subjugated, thank God we live in a free country now, but it's not always been so, so easy to keep our religion. There's other challenges in our country, right? So it's the inner Yetzer Hara, the inner evil inclination, and it's the situation, the setting, the subjugation to the kingdoms. May it be your will, he would pray, that you will deliver us from their hands, that we may return to perform the edicts of your will with a perfect heart. But what's being expressed here is the idea that it is our will to perform your will. Deep down, every person desires to fulfill God's will, to fulfill the Torah. Now, there's things that hold us back. There's things that prevent us at times, but that's our deepest desire. Rabbi Schwab says that was Matan Torah. That was the giving of the Torah, where it was instilled in our hearts the desire to fulfill the Torah. And he says, when God went to the other nations of the world, he wasn't offering them the Torah that he gave to us. That's not what it was about. What it was about was, indeed, they have 7 mitzvos. They have 7 commandments. God was saying, all the nations have 7 commandments. Would you want those 7 commandments to become part of your essence, to be a part of you? That it will be, our will to perform your will with regards to those commandments. If we go back to the way the Midrash teaches it, we'll see it fits in beautifully, because what do they say when they say no? They say, God says, do you want the Torah? He doesn't mean the Torah, the 613 commandments. He means, do you want me to gift the Torah just as I'm gifting it to the Jewish people, making it a part of them? I'll make your commandments a part of you. And you know what they say? They say, no way. Because we don't want to change our essence. You want to change our essence? You want to make it a part of us to fulfill these commandments? No. The entire essence of our Father is murder. The essence, our illicit relations is our entire essence. That's who we are. And here also, our Father's entire essence is stealing. What's all this about our essence? Just say we don't want to do it, right? But no, the offer wasn't, do you want to have this commandment or not? They have that commandment whether they want it or not. What was being offered to them was a matan Torah, so to speak, a gift of the Torah into their hearts, into their souls, that it would become a part of them. It would change their essence. And that's what they were turning down. But certainly God was not passing over the Jewish people and going to other nations first to see if they would want the Torah that we were given. We received the Torah as the descendants of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the nation that would be God's special representatives in the world. We were given the harder version, the 613. But we accepted it. We accepted it not just to do them, but we accepted it as part of our essence. And it ties back into that point. How could we just accept it? Isn't it irresponsible? No, we trusted God, but still we trust him that he'll give us commandments only that we can fulfill. But still, it's hard, right? But it's more than that. It's not just that we can fulfill them. God implanted within our souls the ability and the desire, and the eternal desire and the eternal ability to be able to fulfill them. So again, we go back to the words of Ramban. When they hear God speak, Ramban says, his faith entered your heart to enable you to cleave to him, and your soul will not be separated from that faith forever. There's something that binds us to God from that moment on, and forever. It's our will to do God's will, and that's what that's what was being offered to us. That's what we accepted to change our essence. And indeed, it's part of our essence. It's in the essence of every Jew is this very idea of our will is to perform your will, as expressed by Rabbi Alexandri. And the idea for us nowadays is that at Sinai, there were 600,000 souls that were present. Now, the souls were 600,000 men between 20 and 60, and women corresponding to that, and children also. But the 600,000 was just the men. But that number somehow encompasses all the souls of the Jewish people, and all future souls are offshoots or split souls from those original souls that stood at Sinai. So every soul was present at Sinai, and this ability to fulfill the Torah is actually implanting and imbued in all of our souls as well. Now, I want to add just one more idea to this, which relates to converts, because the converts' ancestors didn't stand at Sinai. So there's two possible understandings of one is that still when a convert joins with the Jewish people, so their soul attaches itself to the sort of the soul, the grand soul of the Jewish people, and they're able to tap into that. But there's another way to understand the converts' relationship, which was taught by one of the great converts of our history, really, and a very famous or somewhat famous convert by the name of Avraham ben Avraham, the Ger Tzedek, the righteous convert, Avraham ben Avraham. He lived in Poland in the 1700s. He had a relationship with the Vilna Gaon. He sought counsel from the Vilna Gaon in the challenges. He was born Valentin Potocki or Potocki. He was a Polish nobleman from a very prominent family, Christians, and he converted to Judaism, which was absolutely forbidden. And ultimately, when they found out, they tried to convince him to renounce his Judaism. He refused. Ultimately, he was burned at the stake. And there's many different stories about his life and his death. But we have some traditions also of things some of the Torah that he shared, and some of the ideas, the novel Torah thoughts that he taught or uncovered. And one idea that he taught, he says, again, going back to this midrash that teaches that God went to all the nations and they said no. So again, whatever exactly that means, how it played out, if it played out, or it's more of a conceptual idea, but they would have turned it down if they were offered. But Avram ben Avram, Abraham, the son of Abraham, the righteous convert of Vilna from the 1700s, he said, but let's think about this. He says, do you think that every single Jew actually wanted to accept the Torah? Probably not. There were probably some that didn't, but the majority wanted to. And therefore, the Torah was given to the Jewish people. He said, do you think every single Gentile did not want to accept the Torah? He says, no, certainly not. He says, I'm sure there were some that did want to accept the Torah, some Gentiles, some members of those nations. But they went with the majority. Whatever the majority of that nation wanted, then that's what was then that nation didn't get the Torah. Only the Jewish people had a majority who wanted to accept the Torah. So he said, but what about all those souls of all those Gentiles who did want to accept the Torah? What happened to them? He says every future convert comes from those souls, from all those righteous Gentiles who wanted to accept the Torah but weren't able to at the time. So because the rest of their nation didn't want to, so they didn't get the Torah at the time. But throughout the generations, those souls will return, and those souls will later join the Jewish people as converts. So in a way, I guess you could, at that time as well, we can say that right. I don't know if it directly ties into what we're talking about, but I think it's an important idea that even at that time, even there were members of other nations that would have wanted to accept the Torah, and so they can also be imbued with this idea, perhaps that again, we're getting into like souls, and it's not, this is already very mystical and Kabbalistic and more difficult to understanding. I definitely, have no expertise in this area, but this is just to me a very beautiful and fascinating and beautiful idea that those Gentiles who originally wanted to accept the Torah but couldn't, later have those souls have the opportunity to return and later join the Jewish nation. Okay, now I want to turn a little bit to another idea, which is that what we're saying now, again, we call this class what happened at Sinai. So what we've learned so far tonight is something very tremendous, something very impactful happened at Sinai, which is that the Jewish people, the Israelites, were imbued in their souls with the ability to the ability to fulfill the Torah, the desire to fulfill the Torah, and we trusted God that we would be able to do so. Now, something even greater happened according to the Kabbalistic tradition, but it wasn't everlasting. Because, as we'll discuss in a moment, because of the golden calf. But before we get there, let's introduce another type of question. And again, this is something that there are multiple answers for, and we'll probably come back to and offer other approaches in later classes. But right now, we're going to offer our first approach. Actually, this is a good source you can read on your own. It basically summarizes what we already said, but it's sourced in the Ramchal, which is a very valuable source. But you could read that on your own. Now, let's take a look at some of the commandments of the 10 commandments and note some differences between the way the commandments appear in Exodus and the way they appear the second time in Deuteronomy. So the main differences are found in commandments 4, 5, and 10. So here we have, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son or daughter, your manservant or your maidservant or your cattle, or the strangers within your settlements. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So it says keep the Sabbath, and it gives the reason keep Shabbos, because in 6 days God made heaven and earth and sea and everything else, and he rested on the seventh day. That's how it appears in Exodus. But you'll notice that it's quite different the way it appears in the 10 commandments in Deuteronomy. So over there, first of all, at the very beginning, it throws in these words. It says, this should be in red. Guard the Sabbath. Here it says, remember the Sabbath. This should be in blue. Remember the Sabbath, remember Shabbos. And here it says, guard. In Hebrew, remember is zachar, and guard is shamar. There's a tradition that God actually said both words at once. Zachar and shamar, remember and guard. Remember usually relates to the positive commandments of Shabbos, like making kiddush, having meals, etc. And guard usually refers to the prohibitions of Shabbos, the not doing work on Shabbos. But in any event, we see there's a difference between the two with the change of this word. Additionally, it just throws in these words, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Now that perhaps can mean with the first time the 10 commandments appear, maybe. Then it says, you shall not do any work, you, your son or daughter, your manservant, your maidservant, your ox, your donkey, and all your cattle. So while here it just said your cattle, here it gets a little bit more specific, and it says your ox, your donkey, and it mentions some of them. Now here's the major difference, which is that over here in Exodus, it gave the reason for Shabbos is because in 6 days, God made heaven and earth and rested on the seventh. But in Devarim and Deuteronomy, it says the reason is, you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord your God took you out from there with a strong hand and with an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. So we have a totally different reason. This time, the Sabbath apparently commemorates the Exodus from Egypt, that we're to rest, to remember that God took us out from Egypt. So that's a major change. And we have to ask, why does it change? Why are the commandments different in Exodus and in Deuteronomy and Devarim? Now, there's a couple of other differences. I'm going to leave them off for now. I'm not sure if we're going to have time to really answer them. This is the most glaring, so we'll start with this. So there's many different approaches to what this change is all about. But just in context, we should understand that in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, it's Moshe recounting the Ten Commandments to the Jewish people years later, and years after the revelation. Now, it's possible, and it seems that the Talmud understands this way. We know that there were two sets of tablets, right? Originally, Moses, after the Jewish people hear the Ten Commandments from God, Moses goes up for 40 days. God creates two tablets with the Ten Commandments. Moses comes down the mountain and sees the Jewish people dancing around the golden calf, and he breaks the tablets. And that's the end of the first set of tablets. Moses goes back up and eventually makes new tablets and brings them down on Yom Kippur. But so it's possible that maybe there was a difference between the first tablets and the second tablets, and that what appears in Exodus is the first tablets, and perhaps what appears in Deuteronomy is the second tablets. And there's definitely those who understand this way. It seems the Talmud understood this to be the case. And we're going to work within that framework now to answer, but why the change? And the major event that occurred in the middle, as I mentioned before, which maybe changed things, was the golden calf. The Jewish people worshiped the golden calf, and from then on, nothing is the same. But we have to still explain, so why the change because of that? So I'm going to share with you something from a sefer, a book called Nefesh HaChaim, the soul of life. It's a sort of amateur Kabbalah. In other words, it's accessible Kabbalah written by Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner. It's accepted for even non-experts in Kabbalah to learn it. It's regular yeshiva learning, and we're going to read a little bit together. So Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner was the primary student of the Vilna Gaon, Rabbi Eliyahu of Vilna. He lives from 1749 to 1821. He writes as follows. He says, the situation is that before the sin, he, meaning man, certainly had the absolute freedom of choice. So which sin? He's not talking about the golden calf right now. He's talking about Adam and Eve. The first sin of eating from the tree of knowledge. He says, before the sin, we had free choice. Man could incline himself towards anything he desired, to do good or the opposite. For this was the primary intention of the entirety of creation, meaning God put us here to be tested. If there's no test, if there's no free will, then we can't earn our stripes. We can't earn our relationship with God. So God created the world with the intent that man should be tested. Now, so it must be that man had free choice from the very beginning. But he explains, however, she says you also see that later he sinned. So obviously he had some level of free choice to do the wrong thing because Adam and Eve sinned. However, it's not that the matter of his choice was the result of the powers of evil being an internal part of him. For he was a completely righteous person, comprised only of the structures and processes of the powers of holiness alone. And all of his interactions were totally righteous, holy and refined, absolute good, without any mixture or inclination to the opposite side in any way. Rather, the powers of evil stood off to the side and were independent, external to him. In other words, he's telling us that when Adam and Eve were created, there was no internal Yetzer Hara. There was no internal evil inclination. On their own, they were perfect. They were good. They could only do God's will on their own. And they didn't know from sin. They were completely righteous. But did they have free will to do wrong? They did. How is that possible? Because there could be an external evil inclination. And there was. The powers of evil stood external to him. He had the freedom of choice to engage with the powers of evil, just as man has the freedom of choice to enter in the midst of the fire. Therefore, when the other side desired to cause him to sin, the serpent had to come from the outside to seduce. It didn't come from within. It was an outside force that seduced Adam and Eve to sin. Not like it is now that the urge that seduces the person is within the person himself and makes it appear to the person as if he himself, he is the one who desires and lusts to do the iniquity, and not another outside himself seduces him. In other words, when Adam and Eve were created, they had no internal evil inclination. They were perfectly righteous, but their free will still could be manifest. They could be tempted from outside. After they sinned, the Eitz Hadas, Tov V'Ra, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, what that means is that now man can know good and evil internally. That after they ate from the tree, so evil became a part of us. Not that we're intrinsically evil, but that's not what we believe. But there's a Yetzer Hara within us now. Now there's an internal evil inclination that we have to do. And the temptation can come from internally. And that's what occurred to after they ate from the tree of knowledge. Now we knew good and evil internally. And he explains that lasted all the way up until we stood at Sinai. When we stood at Sinai, we were cleansed from that, the Kabbalists teach us. Really, the Talmud teaches us. We were cleansed from that. And after the revelation at Sinai, once again, we couldn't sin internally. There was no more Yetzer Hara. There was no evil inclination within us after the revelation at Sinai until we sinned again. And again, it came from outside with the golden calf. The golden calf, the sages teach us that the Satan, the evil inclination, appeared, and he made it look like Moshe was dead. Moses has died. He's not coming back. And it was again an outside force that seduced the Jewish people into sinning. And once again, at that point, they returned to the state of impurity, meaning at the moment of the revelation at Sinai, we had returned to the state of Adam in the Garden of Eden. We were like Adam Harishon Kodem Achet, before the sin. We were now free of the internal evil inclination, but that only lasted up until the golden calf. There, once again, the inclination came from outside, the Satan, and seduced us into sinning. And at that point, the same pollution is the words they use. The zuama is the Hebrew. It was returned and became mixed into them as in the beginning, and that's how we remain till this day, until the end of time, or until the end of days. We will continue to have an internal evil inclination, and therefore it's harder. It's more difficult. We have to fight not just an outside seductive force, but within ourselves. We have an ongoing struggle to do what's right. And that's a change that occurred it began pre the sin in the Garden of Eden. We were free of that internal evil inclination. After the sin of Adam, now it became an internal temptation, and that it remained that way until the revelation at Sinai. At that moment, we were cleansed, we were pure, we no longer had an internal evil inclination, but it didn't last so long. It only lasted till the golden calf, and then things went back to the way that they had been, and they became the way they are now, where we have an internal evil inclination. Now, what does that have to do with the 10 Commandments? So now we have a little bit of an insight into an idea which is that when we first received the Ten Commandments before the golden calf, we had reached a level of purity similar to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. We were on a whole new plane. We were on a plane equal to Adam and Eve. And therefore, some commentaries suggest, I think for the pre-Tzaddik, the Reb Tzaddik HaKohen from Lublin, that the difference between the first and the second sets of tablets, or the first and the second sets of the Ten Commandments, the difference is going to be pre-golden calf and post-golden calf. Pre-golden calf, we were on a tremendous level. We were like Adam before the first sin. Now, Adam before the first sin, before his sin, was not supposed to have to work. He wasn't going to have to work for his food. That was part of the curse that occurred to Adam, that by the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread. But before that, everything was going to come free to man without having to work for it. And at the moment of the Ten Commandments, of the original revelation, we were on that level. We were on that plane. In the desert, we anyways experienced that. We didn't have to work for our food. We ate from the manna. But once we got to Israel, then that was over. But only because of the sin of the golden calf. If not for the sin of the golden calf, we would have continued on that plane of being like we were in the Garden of Eden, which was a level that we reached at Sinai. So the idea of Shabbos actually could be a little bit different. What the focus is at the original revelation, and then after the golden calf. At the original revelation, so Shabbos commemorates, as it describes here, in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and sea. It commemorates the idea that God created the world. Shabbos tells us to just contemplate God and contemplate that God created the world. It's a day of remember, zachor, think. There's nothing to really take a break from. We weren't working all week, right? We weren't going to be working all week. We weren't going to have to provide for ourselves. So what's Shabbos? So it's a special day where we contemplate the special day of God ceasing activity. We contemplate the idea of God creating the world. That was Shabbos before the golden calf. But Shabbos after the golden calf is a little bit different, because after the golden calf, now we have to work for our food. Now our week looks totally different. Now it's going to be a break from the week's work. And so it's not just about taking a break, focusing on that God created the world. It's actually taking a break from all of our efforts and all of our work. So we adding your ox, your donkey, because it's your animals have to rest too. That's the animals were anyways resting, but now it's more of a focus on that, because it's a day where we're breaking from all of our work. And now there's a focus on the Exodus. Oh, and also now it's guard, right? Now it's the prohibitions. It's take a break from work, guard the Shabbos, don't work on this day, because you need this is a day where you're going to take a break from all of your labor. So, and that's why also it's associated with the Exodus from Egypt, where we were slaves, we were working, right? And then, so when you take a break from your work, that's when you can remember that God gave us a nice break from our work, that God took us out from slavery. So that's the change that goes on here. There's each detail is explained. We're not going to have time to explain, but that's the main idea is this shift that at the time, according to this more deeper Kabbalistic idea, at the time of the revelation, we reached a level where we were like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. We weren't going to have to work. That type of Shabbos is not about breaking from our work of the week. It's more about having a time where we focus on God creating the world, as opposed to later, after the golden calf. Now we're back to work. Basically, our lives have changed. Now we're taking a break from actual providing for ourselves. So there we think about this, breaking from work. That's where we think about that God took us out from Egypt. Okay, so just to summarize the main ideas that we touched on, the important ideas, we touched on the idea that we said Nasa v'nishma. When we accepted the Torah, we said we can do it because we trusted God. And we learned tonight that it's not just that God gave us commandments, but at Sinai, he also imbued us with the ability to fulfill them. And it's in each of our hearts. We each have the desire to fulfill them, but we also have the ability. And that was imbued within us at the time of the giving of the Torah. That was Matan Torah. That was the giving of the Torah. That it was given. Our essence, our very essence was changed at that moment and forevermore. And we still carry that in our souls till today. At the end, now we just saw that actually we experienced an even greater change, but that wasn't lasting. We had actually been cleansed of the internal Yetzer Hara, the internal evil inclination at the time of the Sinai revelation. That only lasted a short time, about 40 days, until they worshipped the golden calf. But despite that didn't last, and we still have that internal evil inclination. But what is still with us is that burning desire, that eternal desire to fulfill God's will, as well as the ability for each of us to do so. And that's where we'll stop.